Okay, so let's get started. Hi everyone and welcome to People Power Changing the Energy System, which is our third event in our Festival of Disruptive Thinking series, which is hosted by the Entrepreneurial Institute. My name is Annabelle and it's my pleasure to be moderating this event and welcoming you all here today. My colleague Nina is also here and she'll be posting some additional info in the chat box. For those who aren't familiar with the Entrepreneurship Institute, we support students, staff and alumni at King's to develop their entrepreneurial mindset. We believe that everyone can be entrepreneurial and that entrepreneurial people can make the world a better place by solving problems and creating a smarter, more equal and sustainable future. This week's festival showcases disruptive thinking, which is the ability to question and challenge the status quo of established systems to progress new ideas and way of thinking. We're so delighted that Dr Anna Rebmann has joined us here today to share her experience of being disruptive, and hopefully she'll inspire you all to be change makers too. Anna is a lecturer in social entrepreneurship at King's Business School. Most recently, her research has focused on exploring how social entrepreneurs influence local environments and create long-term impact. Today, she's going to lead us in a discussion about how communities can come together to disrupt the norms of our energy systems. So just before we begin, there are a few housekeeping points. This event is being recorded, so please do mute your mics and turn off your cameras if you prefer not to be on film. There will also be time for a Q&A at the end of this session, so please do drop any questions into the chat or save them till the end. And yeah, so we're ready to go whenever you're ready, Anna.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. I hope you can hear me fine. I'm really pleased to be here and thank you everyone for spending your lunch with me. So as Annabelle talked about, my research is on entrepreneurship and it's looking at communities being entrepreneurial. So it fits very well with what the Entrepreneurship Institute's about, because it's about communities making change and in the energy system, so it's sustainable in multiple ways. So let's get started. If we think about energy, it's defined by scientists as the ability to do work, and our societies and our ways of working have developed by our abilities to harness different forms of different forms of energy, to power transport, to power heating, our lights, computers, phones. So many different aspects of our daily lives have changed due to the fact that we have readily available energy such as electricity. And in developed countries, many of us don't really think about where does this energy come from. We just take that we have energy available and affordable for granted. And we don't think about the technologies, the systems that provide it. This has been shifting over the last year. We normally expect to be able to turn on our lights, cook dinner, stay warm at a flick of a switch. However, with the energy crisis, rising bills, and all of the presence of this in the news, we've been forced to think about where does our energy come from and how much are we actually using. Some people have actually been thinking about this for quite a long time. They've been wondering about our energy system and concerned about it because of its contributions to climate change, as well as the inequalities that have been present in our current energy system for a long time. Energy poverty has exacerbated enormously over the last year, but it has always been prevalent. Dealing with climate change is one of the grand challenges that our country and the world faces, and it's leading electricity systems to undergo massive transformations to decarbonise. In the UK, the national government has an aim to reach net zero by 2050, and the National Grid, which is the organisation which runs the UK's national electricity grid, says that this is achievable, but it requires immediate action across all key technologies, all policy areas, and full engagement across society and end consumers. When we hear about the actions we should be taking, normally the focus is on the individual or the government. In terms of individuals, there's a focus on how we should turn down our thermostats, put on more jumpers, make our homes more energy efficient, think about the appliances that we're using. Or it's a call on the government to act, to make deals, to think about how we can have cheaper energy, shift our system to renewables. Both of these actors are necessary in our energy system to make changes, yet this focus on the individual or the government overlooks another form of action, and this is collective action. And what I'm interested in is collective action at the community level, which in energy is known as community energy. So what is community energy? Well, community energy is about people coming together to take collective action to reduce, purchase, manage, or generate energy. So this can involve a huge variety of different projects. And what does this actually mean in practice? Well, I'll illustrate with a few examples from my research project, Social Entrepreneurship at the Grid Edge, which has been funded by CREDS, which is a Centre for Research in Energy Demand. And in this research project, we've been studying some of the most innovative community energy groups in the UK and the Netherlands to discover how they create change through innovating in the energy system. One example is Energise Barnsley. Energise Barnsley is a community energy group which is based in the north of England, and they're motivated by ensuring an inclusive transition where poorer people and elderly people are not left behind. So they've installed solar panels, as you can see here, on council houses, many of which are lived in by elderly residents. They've also trialled providing batteries to these residents so that they can make more use of the solar energy generated. One of the key issues with solar is that obviously it's only there when the sun shines, but batteries mean that they can store up energy when it's being produced and use it later in the evening when electricity demand is higher and costs are also higher from the grid. This then enables these people to lower their bills and is helping out in reducing energy poverty in Barnsley. Another example is Ealing Transition. Ealing Transition is part of the Transition Town movement, which is a social movement which aims to stimulate local action on creating a low carbon and socially just future. So in Ealing Transition, they decided that one of the areas that they wanted to work on was energy, and they wanted to promote renewable energy in Ealing. They reached out to their network. They have over 2,000 people who are in their mailing list, and they get involved in different kind of projects and so forth. And they found a few members who were really interested in taking this further. One of them had really useful knowledge as he was working at the Open University, actually teaching modules on energy, and had some engineering background. Another had some relevant knowledge in terms of setting up businesses, and together they worked with Ealing Council to bring a project about for putting solar on schools. They chose this focus as schools have very little money to do these kind of decarbonising actions, as do councils, and at the same time you get the advantage of you're working in a place and putting solar where young people are, so they get to learn about solar energy and decarbonisation too. Ealing Transition have now installed solar panels on all of the feasible primary schools in Ealing, which is about 25, and they've expanded into supporting neighbouring councils to do the same. Aldgate Solar Power is making renewable accessible to inner city residents in the City of London. It developed from the idea of one of the residents on a housing estate in the City of London in Aldgate, who saw the empty roof space of his building and thought it would be a good idea to put solar panels on these. So he approached another community energy group that's been very active in London called Repowering, and they've started working as a kind of community energy development organisation. So they started off with their own projects, and since then they've started helping other people set up their own community energy groups around London. And Aldgate is an example of this, where they'll support and train members of the local community who want to be part of community energy to set up these community energy groups and be able to do things such as raise share funding, crowdfunding basically from the community to pay for solar panels. So Aldgate Solar Power is now providing cheaper, greener electricity to this council estate in Aldgate, and you can see them here on their roof. But why should we care about community energy? Well, there's lots of different value that's created through community energy. Almost all, I would say probably all, are actually motivated by decarbonisation. all of the projects that we studied had this as a core goal. How can they encourage more renewables to be installed? But there's also a wide range of other goals that these community energy groups have. Inclusion and reducing energy poverty is often one of such goals. Energise Barnsley is a good example of this, as they're looking to find inclusivity across the energy system by including older people and people who can't necessarily afford to install these technologies themselves. But they also deal with other barriers to adoption. And one of these barriers is knowledge. People don't actually know, how do you use these systems? What do you actually do to use a battery to make it store energy when you need it and use it afterwards? So they have a big part of their projects, which is actually sitting with people in their houses, explaining, how do you use this technology? How can it fit in with what they do in their daily lives? And through this knowledge, then residents are able to use that technology to the best of their ability to provide cheaper bills, reducing energy poverty. Some of the very innovative community energy groups are also testing the deployment of new technologies. Solar panels, for example, they're actually quite well known. So there's many community groups which can do this because it's an easy technology, but batteries are something that's newer, and how you actually help residents to understand batteries, where to install them, how they fit with people's everyday lives is a challenge to adoption. So Barnsley Council has found it very useful working with Energise Barnsley, because from this they learn about what new technologies are there, how they work, and how people who are living in their housing can actually use them. And from the testing that they've done with projects with Energise Barnsley, they then choose to deploy these new technologies throughout more of their housing stock. Being focused on a specific local community means that community energy groups are also looking to ensure that as many local benefits are achieved as possible. So they tend to create local jobs. For example, repowering, whenever they go into a new community, they'll always hire someone part-time to work as a community energy engagement officer, trying to reach out to the local community to give things like energy advice, bring more people on board, get that discussion going about energy. They've also looked to provide youth apprenticeships to give young people the chance to learn about the kind of jobs that are available in the renewable technology sector and what they could do in terms of further training. In Energise Barnsley, they've worked with the Barnsley Council contractors to retrain them on how do you install these batteries and maintain them over the long term. So they're equipping the council and these people with the knowledge and skills to work in the green economy. Community energy groups are also very focused on feeding back any profits that they have into the local community. The typical organisational form for community energy groups is a community benefit society. Now, this is a specific legal form in the UK which requires any profits to be fed back into the community. And the typical way to do this is through a community fund. So the model generally is that community energy groups will develop a project. They'll say, we want to install this technology. It can save this much money. Normally it's things like solar panels, and they'll put out a share offering. So they'll pay back the shareholders invest, and then with the money that they're getting from the community energy group is getting from the solar panels, which is given at a cheaper price, normally what happens is that they'll then have some extra bits of money, the profit, and that will go into community fund, which then the local people can decide, how do we want to spend this? And it enables all sorts of different kinds of locally valued projects. In Energise Barnsley, for example, they've used this by working with Age Concern to help give energy advice to elderly people. In other places, for example, we've looked at another community energy group in Brighton. They've actually invested in this money in setting up another community energy group. But this money could be used in whichever way. Other groups such as Repowering really push on the community empowerment angle with the training that they give to community members on how do you run these kind of groups and how can you act and how can you work with local councils. These are skills that these members can then often take and apply to other projects and other ideas that they have to improve their local community. So as you can see, there's lots of different forms of value that can be created through these community energy projects. But What's disruptive about community energy? So here we're defining disruption as anyone who's putting forward new ideas or challenging the status quo of established systems to progress new ways of thinking. And I'd like to put forward two ways that community energy does this. First, it challenges who gets to shape our energy system. And second, it challenges the norms of who is an entrepreneur. We generally tend to think of these as individuals acting, but it shifts the focus of action to the community. Let me take these each in turn. So if we're thinking about who gets to shape our energy system, it might seem that the community is not ideally placed for this. The energy system is complex. It's dominated by huge energy suppliers, by producers of oil and gas and electricity, hugely expensive infrastructure, and is closely regulated by the government. So it doesn't really seem like there's much room for communities to act here. But community energy is acting, and it is challenging in some ways who gets to shape this energy system. Rather than waiting for energy markets to lead to or government to lead to the decarbonisation of our energy system, many actors in community energy are impatient and think it should be happening earlier. So they're acting now and doing what they can with people in their community to push for this transformation at a local level. They see the world is not as they want it to be, and they're acting to make those changes where they can. And with this, we see that they have quite a range of smaller projects, but showing that this action can be made at the local basis and show there are alternative ways for organising in our energy system. Another important point about this is it also shows how we can be more inclusive and bring more people into that just transition. But why is this important? Why does this have the power to disrupt? I mean, on the one hand, these are really small organisations. Many of them are actually amateurs. They're volunteers who are doing this in their evenings after work, or they're recently retired. It's not always a professional outfit. And they're not going to replace the energy industry. However, if we pay attention to what they highlight through their actions, they can show how the energy industry might be organised differently. For example, through focusing on community empowerment and inclusion, they highlight these elements are possible alongside the transition to a greener energy system and highlight ways in which all actors can potentially include these elements. One way we can see that changes are happening in the energy system is that community energy is beginning to be consulted more and more by the main players in the energy system. As I mentioned at the start, the National Grid says that all of society needs to be involved in our transition to net zero. And community energy groups are well placed here because they're very deeply embedded in their local communities and they understand the people that they're working with and the problems that they're facing in regards to energy. So governments, both local, national, the grid operators, and also some of the technology companies see that it's quite useful to work with community energy groups to access people, the general public, that they might not have that access to otherwise. For example, in one of our case studies, we see that a tech company was wanting to work with a community energy group precisely because they were able to reach maybe more disadvantaged households that would be harder for that technology company to reach on their own. And they had that understanding that if we just design technology around the wealthy, then it's not going to be technology that is designed for all of us. The second way that community energy is disruptive is it challenges that idea, that narrative that is dominant of the individual as the entrepreneur. We often have this narrative of, the heroic entrepreneur like Elon Musk who's disrupting systems and bringing change. Even when we move to social entrepreneurship, there's a lot of focus, and that's also in the academic literature, on the individuals who are doing this. So here's a picture of Mohammed Yunus, who founded the Grameen Bank and won a Nobel Prize for pushing forward microcredit and microfinance. But community energy shows that it's not just about individuals. Communities can be entrepreneurs too. What do we mean by community-based entrepreneurship? Well, this is communities acting corporately as both the entrepreneur and enterprise in pursuit of the common good. So this means the community is acting entrepreneurially and it's acting as the agent for its own development. And this is not just the case in the energy system, but it's an approach that is being used by many communities to tackle many different problems. In the UK alone, there are over 11,000 community-based businesses. And these are businesses that are doing things such as taking over pubs, libraries, housing, parks, shops, leisure centres. People are working as a community to take control of local assets that are important to them and delivering important services to their lives. These community-based businesses and community-based entrepreneurship may not be the next hotbeds for our unicorns, but they are making real differences to communities. And in our research, we're looking into detail about how community energy groups are acting to do this. And one of the things that's really important to note is that communities don't act alone. They have to work with multiple stakeholders. And these stakeholders are instrumental in actually determining how and when community enterprise opportunities are developed. And this is partly because of the fact that skills and resources to tackle many of these issues that community-based businesses are trying to tackle, such as things like energy poverty or the transition to renewables, the skills and resources are dispersed amongst multiple actors. So you need to work with all of these actors to actually make a change in the system. Our research shows the importance of collaborative stakeholders for community energy groups, and that these come from a wide range of different areas. The government plays an important role, both centrally in terms of funding, availability, and regulations, but also the local government, where working with councils can really enable community energy groups to scale up what they're doing. For example, Energise Barnsley, through working through Barnsley Council, immediately has access to all of their council housing stock. And so they were able to put together one of the largest community energy group solar panel installations at that time in 2016, installing over 360 solar panels on houses. Houses with solar panels, rather. And similarly, with Ealing, working through the council enables lots of different schools to access solar panels, which they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, and it would have been very difficult for community energy groups to have that same reach. So communities, with the support of their stakeholders, can create economic, social, and environmental value in places that might otherwise be left behind. So what does this mean for you? What can you take away from community energy? I want you to take away 2 points, really. One is that you can play a part in shaping complex systems. You can question the status quo, look around you, and consider what a better future looks like. This is what community energy groups are doing. And it may be that it's on a small scale and it might seem really insignificant, but it can show how the future can be different. And it can build a new narrative about how change is possible. And it's quite interesting because recently in the management literature, there's been some shift to say, well, management has always looked at what is and what is happening now. But if we want to change the future and we want to have an influence in that conversation, we want to also study what could be. And community energy and thinking about how things can be different is a good, important way for doing this. Secondly, community energy shows that you can make a change in your local community. And you can look around in your community and you'll probably be surprised to see where there are community businesses playing a role. You might also see that there are opportunities potentially for you to be making a difference. There are places where community could work together to make changes. For example, in my local community, I'm now helping out with basically developing a community group to run a local nature reserve, which was not being not being able to get the resources that it needed because of all of the cuts. It's a small thing. It doesn't require a huge amount of my time, but it does actually make a positive change in the community and bring people together on something that then they care about. So you can start with really small actions. It might be as small as there's a little plot of land and it could be a nice community garden. We see this also in work that we're doing in Newham, where we're talking to community energy groups about what actions they're taking and how energy might play a role in furthering their goals and their values. And lots of these groups start with these small actions of a community garden, bringing neighbours together, then seeing what other problems they face collectively and seeing what other collective solutions might be possible. So that's all from me, and I really look forward to hearing your thoughts. Maybe you know of any community businesses in your area, and also your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was really, really interesting and completely relevant to the current situation with energy that we're in. I especially thought one of your last points about like who is actually considered the entrepreneur was really interesting, like that it can be a whole community instead of just an individual. So yeah, we'll open up the floor to any questions. You can put them in the chat or raise your hand and unmute your mic to ask Anna. I can go first because I do actually have a question that I would be quite interested in asking. I was wondering what you thought about perhaps the more like extreme groups such as Just Stop Oil. Like, do you see them as a community energy group? Do you think it's a good way to convince people to join these types of communities?
Actually, it's a very interesting question because and this isn't maybe so much from research, but from practical experience, in that it can be difficult to bring the stakeholders on board that you need, like councils, when you are positioning yourself mainly as a protest group. So in terms of community-based businesses, they wouldn't be so much because they're not using, I guess, market mechanisms to try and create that change, which our community energy groups do. But I think they all play a role in sort of changing the discourse and shifting and bringing awareness to issues. And one of the issues that community energy groups have is that there's a lot of regulation that is difficult for them to deal with, and maybe in some respects prevents them from having the projects they could have. I mean, there's some debate as to how to change it, but you do also need some kind of they are pushing to sort of maybe some of these more forms of trying to get change on a governmental level as well. But I think it's challenging to be kind of a Just Stop Oil type of protester and then try and work with the council to install solar panels and things like that. I think they require different skills, and it can make it difficult to work with your stakeholders.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. I think we've got a question from Yale. I hope I'm saying that right. Sorry if not. If you want to unmute your mic and
yeah, no worries. Thank you, Anna. That was really, really fascinating. And I'm completely sympathetic to the intuition. And yes, I do have other examples for you, so we can chat later. I had a few questions, and I guess to start with is, sorry for the background. I'm trying to understand what it is that's shared. So when you say community, I think it's interesting to think through what exactly is being shared. So in one example of a community project that I know of, it's wind turbine in Wales, that the way actually the sharing aspect of it was that it was basically funded through like a crowdsourcing mechanism. And I think that expands on our definition of community, right? Because it means it's people like you and me who can participate, but it doesn't require the same geographical proximity that I think your examples illustrate. And so I guess this is a way of asking, what exactly is shared? How would you define community in that way? Is that people sharing local schools, people sharing megawatts, people sharing revenues of a particular project, in which case, shareholders of something are also a community? At what point would you be uncomfortable calling it community? Like, how far are you willing to take?
I mean, it's a very good question, and it's one there's a lot of debate about in the literature. We took a broad brush approach in sort of saying, let's look at all the different ways that we could understand community. And in our research, we were particularly interested in looking at urban community energy groups, precisely because it doesn't necessarily have the same place-based connotations. Like if you're in London, there's knowing exactly what your place-based community is sort of challenging. It's not like in a village where you know everyone. You know, I work here, I live in another part of London, I might go out and see friends in a completely different part of London. So we did purposefully choose these urban ones to kind of challenge our ideas of community and see what arises. So we've been very broad. I think in the community, you make a good point about the investors. I think a lot of the community energy groups, they would like to kind of focus on maybe local, like not London as a city, but maybe on a borough level, or, you know, Brighton as a city. But they obviously are taking share that wherever people want to give money to them, they're happy to accept them. And what's interesting is that the general model is that if you've got an investment, one shareholder has one vote. So they have a democratic governance structure. The thing that I found quite interesting about doing this was and doing this research, and something that I want to investigate further, is actually how involved the community is in decision making and governance processes. Because even though you might have shareholders having one member, one vote, are these people then actually interested in what happens in the direction of the company? And then in other places, it's also about, well, you might not be investing in it, but you're the person in the building where the solar panels are on top, and then what role do you have to play in this? And that varies quite a lot across our different community energy groups. Energize Barnsley is quite an interesting example, because basically their way of working with the community is really working with the council. So the council's kind of the proxy, and the council has, I think, 3 of the seats on their board, 3 of the directors come directly from the council. I mean, Energize Barnsley then does work very closely with the local people who are getting the technologies, and a couple of them have become interested and started working with Energize Barnsley. But it's a very different approach from, say, Repowering, who are going out into the community and saying, well, we need to get all of our directors from the community and we'll train you up. So there's very interesting differences to explore here, and I think that's something we'd like to explore further in then unpicking what does this mean in terms of what kind of change they can create. Because I think we started from it going, oh, well, you know, if you're embedded in the community and having that kind of repowering model, that would surely lead you to the most change. But actually working with the council gives these economies of scale that allows so many more lives to be touched. So it might seem kind of less democratic and top down in some respects, but it might be more efficient as a way for change. So there's really interesting things to talk about here.
Quickly, is that okay? I think your last point is really interesting, because one of the things I wrote down is actually, to what extent is participatory really more democratic and really more empowering, and what does participation mean? And we see this in other contexts, but I think energy is a really interesting one to explore, because there's going to be a lot more of these decisions. Think about like EV chargers on local streets, a lot more solar PV. Local councils are going to be more involved, whether it's in the planning level. Individuals in their own homes are going to be more involved. I think it's worth questioning to what extent is the participation actually more democratic and more enabling. Doesn't mean it's not change inducing, but just that particular aspect. So
no, it's a very good point, and it's quite interesting that one of the community energy groups that we studied that is maybe has the most participatory and democratic governance structure, they formed, they're kind of a proper cooperative where their members have come together because they wanted to deal with how do you retrofit their houses, and then they've developed from there. But the energy project we were looking at was how they were developing technology to enable smart charging. So when do you charge your EV vehicle? When do you charge your heating if it's electric? Because you can shift the times that these happen, and that reduces pressure on the energy system and also reduces costs. But what they found is that when they were then trying to pilot this technology, the only people who have this technology are rich people. So whilst they would like to be helping people who are, you know, maybe you're more average person, they're ending up with people who have their Teslas and so forth, which isn't quite what they were hoping for. So there's these tensions as well. I see that Natasha also has a question.
Hi, thanks so much for all the information. I have a solar energy company. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. And what we do is we provide easy solar energy on credit, so people don't have to pay the high upfront cost. And I would love to see more community energy projects here in Nigeria, but we have a number of laws that may be a bit prohibitive. So with my company, I would love to have like an aspect that kind of pushes our policies forward to create more environment for solar to thrive. So in working with local councils, has there been any aspects that you found have really helped push community energy forward, or any laws that you know of that potentially I could look into?
Well, yeah, there are some laws that inhibit community energy. One of them is actually procurement laws, because procurement laws often don't allow a focus, like to choose based on the fact that they're from the local community. So they can't necessarily prioritize community energy groups in their local area. And that's something that councils then, we were talking to Bristol, that has some interesting approaches of how they can make workarounds that. Other issues that community energy groups have are that if you install solar power in the UK, it has to be consumed on site. So it has to, if we have solar power on a block of flats, you can't legally supply it to the people who are in the flats. However, there are some community energy groups who have worked some sort of work around this. So they've partnered up, it's called Energy Local, they've partnered up with Octopus Energy, and Octopus Energy buys all the electricity, but then they have a system whereby people in the flats below or houses nearby can choose to they get notified when the energy is being produced at a high level, and then they can choose to shift when they use their energy, and at that time then they'll be using the local energy. So there are sorts of ways that community energy groups are trying to work around this. On the political side, the Community Energy England is a umbrella organisation in England, and they've been doing a big push to try and change some of these laws so that it can enable more community projects to take place. So, for example, if they were able to do what's called peer-to-peer selling of energy, so that if it was in my flat, could buy it, then they would be able to get extra income streams, which would enable more projects to take place. Yael says, yeah, Ofgem is also running a Sunblocks, which might enable more microgrid projects as well as peer-to-peer. Yeah, the problem is it can be quite difficult for community energy groups to actually access them. One of the things that we looked at in our research was a difference between the UK and the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, they have a sandbox. So this basically allows certain regulations to be to maybe have some dispensation for them, a bit more flexibility to trial new technologies. And in the Netherlands, they allowed community energy groups to actually apply for these projects. In the UK, community energy groups can only be part of these projects if they work with another big actor. So Energise Barnsley, for example, they have worked with the sandboxes, Ofgem sandboxes in the past, but they had to do it through working with the district network operator, and that's the people who actually sort of run the grid at the local level. So there's ways that prevent community energy from accessing them. In terms of what you could learn from our community energy groups to apply for Lagos, I think one of the things that's very interesting is that you have to find someone who's willing in local government, who is willing to push things and try and find new ways to do it, and find ways around issues. With Ealing Transition, they spent quite a long time developing these connections and just doing small things, not related with energy at all, actually, in their case, because they're quite a broad organisation. But that built up that level of trust in the council that they were able to act and do things. So I think it's also kind of finding, where can you do that? What are maybe little test pilots? And once you get that, then the relationship grows. This was something that came out of our interviews with with people working in the council in Barnsley. They said, well, we started with something that was easy, and now we're moving on to more difficult, more challenging, maybe more innovative projects, because they've built that relationship and they've built that trust. Yeah, But I'd love to talk to you further, Natasha.
Yeah. Okay. I did have another question, but I'm sure I could ask it later.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Natasha. I'd love to hear more about your company as well and what you're doing.
Yeah, Anna, if you're happy for people to kind of email you with any questions, I think we could do one more. You know that Hin has put one in the chat box that says, do you have any figures on how much renewable energy these community projects have produced and how much of an impact has it had on our energy consumption from the grid?
It's quite small. It's, as I said, it's not going to change the energy system in itself. I don't know them off the top of my head, but you can go to Community Energy England and they will have the figures. I think the thing that's useful about community energy is that they work in areas where the larger energy companies won't. So, you know, there's putting a small amount of solar panels on a urban roof in London is not particularly it doesn't scale, it's not particularly profitable. You can do it if you don't really care that much about the profits. And I think that's where community energy plays an important role in those areas that might otherwise be left behind, and bringing attention to this fact. But yes, it's a good question.
Yeah, there's been some really great questions in this session. Thank you all so much for coming and for asking your questions with Anna. And thanks again for Anna for hosting this disruptive conversation. It was really interesting. If you would like to hear any more disruptive ideas, and there's still time to register for our remaining events in the Festival of Disruptive Thinking, Nina is going to share a link to our website now in the chat box. And we're also going to share a link to subscribe to our Entrepreneurship Institute newsletter, which is the best way to find out about other events and opportunities like this. So thanks again for coming, and thanks to Anna, and hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.